morning, good afternoon, and evening to those joining us globally as Black History Month slowly draws to a close. Women's History Month begins, and we continue our quest for economic justice, reparative justice, and equal rights for all. My name is Bruce Murray, and I serve as chair of our Democrats Abroad Global Progressive Caucus, also known as PRO-DA. Together with Vice Chair Sue Auxness, as well as our monthly Mondays leaders, Betsy Ettore and Daniel Stein, I invite you again to share in the chat where you vote, where you are tuning in from, and something about an economic justice issue that is especially important to you. Today, we focus on an economic Bill of Rights, which originated in the era of FDR almost a century ago. Since then, the movements for labor rights, civil rights, women's, students, LGBTQ+, environmental, and other rights have pushed the agenda with impressive victories. As we all know, often with painful clarity, much work remains. PRO-DA strives to unite with all whose goal it is to continue and finish that work now. With that in mind, we are very grateful to our special guest speakers who advocate tirelessly for our collective economic rights. We also thank our co-sponsors whose leaders join us today to describe what we can do to achieve Martin Luther King Jr.'s goal of economic justice, ensure equal rights for all ratification, and pave the way to reparative justice. Well, take it away, Betsy.
Any apologies? Okay, thanks very much, Bruce. Today, our monthly Monday discussion centers on the 20th century economic Bill of Rights. As PRO-DA members, we think that it's time to think big. The rules that govern our economy are working best for far too few, at the expense of far too many. While Republicans have sought to dismantle the New Deal and the regulatory apparatus that was developed to protect Americans from an unfettered private sector, Democrats in recent decades have mustered no more than incremental changes to an increasingly unequal and unfair economy. The rise of Donald Trump provides a political lesson for both Democrats and Republicans. People are looking outside the box. Despite the vast gulf between the two major political parties on many issues, on fundamentals, both have adhered to a neoliberal agenda of deregulation, reliance on market-based solutions to our social problems, and a devolution of the role of government in ensuring and enforcing Americans' right to a decent standard of living, economic dignity, and economic mobility. With the above issues in mind, we ask, how do we reverse increasing income inequality in the United States? A 21st century economic Bill of Rights would guarantee all people residing in the United States the right to the essentials of a good life, regardless of their income, race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, or country of origin. In this event, our guest speakers help us to learn more about this progressive proposal and what we can do to implement it. So we have the pleasure of having as our speakers Harvey J. Kaye, an American historian and sociologist. He's the author of several important books, including Thomas Paine and the Promise of America, and The Fight for the Four Freedoms. Dr. Kaye is Professor Emeritus of Democracy and Justice Studies and the Director of the Center for History and Social Change at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay. Alan Minsky is Executive Director of the Progressive Democrats of America, among the strongest progressive organization in the United States. He is a lifelong activist who has worked as a progressive journalist, as program director of KPFK Los Angeles, and coordinator for Pacifica Radio's national coverage of elections. Any questions you may have will be taken after both guests have spoken, And we ask that you use * hand up in the chat box to be recognized and to unmute and ask brief questions. You are also welcome to type questions in the chat if that is more accessible for you. I have the pleasure of handing over to Harvey J. Kaye and Alan Minsky for their presentations. Please take it away.
Okay, so just so everyone knows, Alan and I have been doing this for a while, and we're sort of a tag team here where I talk history, he talks politics and policy. We both answer questions, okay? But before I get into the history, there are a couple of things I want to do. First of all, I want to lay out why this matters, okay? And to do that, I want to go back 17 years to a statement made by a friend of mine, a well-known figure in American public life, Bill Moyers, who gave a talk, which later appeared, I believe, in The Nation magazine. And he said something which has stuck with me all this time and has really inspired a lot of what I've tried to accomplish myself. And Alan and I think, have embraced this idea. America needs something more right now than a must-do list from liberals and progressives. America needs a different story. The leaders and thinkers and activists who honestly tell that story and speak passionately of the moral and religious values it puts in play will be the first political generation since the New Deal to win power back for the people. The right story will set our course for a generation to come. Tell it for America's sake, he wrote. So I want to just say that, look, the Democrats desperately need a vision, a narrative, a story. Americans desperately need a narrative, a vision, a story. We progressives should provide, we should advance, we should cultivate that vision, that narrative, and that story. And we propose that progressives embrace and advance a 21st century economic Bill of Rights, a Bill of Rights firmly grounded in the progressive story of the United States, a Bill of Rights that speaks to Americans' needs, hopes, and aspirations. Now, if you could just put up for me that roster of rights that we're proposing, I would appreciate it. So as it's been made clear, a 21st century economic Bill of Rights will guarantee all people residing in the United States the rights to the essentials of a good life, regardless of their income, race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, or country of origin. A 21st century economic Bill of Rights will establish that all Americans are entitled to a useful job that pays a living wage, a voice in the workplace through a union and collective bargaining, comprehensive quality health care, complete cost-free public education and access to broadband internet, decent, safe, affordable housing, a clean environment and a healthy planet, a meaningful endowment of resources at birth and a secure retirement, sound banking and financial services, an equitable and economically fair justice system. Finally, but by no means complete, recreation and participation in civic and democratic life. I also want to note that although Alan and I are the ones who've been pushing this, as we have for about a year, I guess, I should note that we developed this in concert with Nina Turner, who had reached out to me and to Alan about an economic Bill of Rights when she saw the Gravel video that I did with the with the Gravel Institute on the economic Bill of Rights of FDR and what it would imply for America. So when one talks about an economic Bill of Rights, and we're emphasizing that this is a story and a narrative and a vision that we should embrace and we should advance, what are we talking about? Well, in some ways, it begins, and in some ways, it doesn't quite begin with FDR. It goes back even further. But FDR, his entire presidency, a lot of people don't realize this, was actually framed and actually informed by his desire to create an economic Bill of Rights from start to finish. In September 1932, FDR went to the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco and laid out, or first of all, he decried the prevailing concentration of wealth and power that he said was denying the promise of the Declaration of Independence to the majority of Americans, the promise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And at that moment, he said it was time for a new declaration, and he called this a Declaration of Economic Rights, or an Economic Declaration of Rights, in favor, he said, of an economic constitutional order. Again, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To his mind, from the very beginning, America, the United States, was created for, we know the faults, we know the failings, but that the vision was really freedom, equality, and democracy, and equality in a very material way. In January 1941, FDR reiterated this call, essentially. I mean, 2 terms as president, Americans had labored and struggled to pursue the New Deal. They confronted not only the questions of inequality, not only the questions of need, but they organized labor unions. They organized a vast housewives movement across America. The civil rights movement really did begin anew in the 1930s and would grow all the more during the 1940s. Well, FDR wanted to articulate what Americans had accomplished in a vision. And in January 41 State of the Union, he recognized what they and he had accomplished in fighting the Depression, and proclaimed his very famous promise that after the war, Americans would secure freedom of speech and expression, freedom of worship, which were already in the First Amendment, the first of the Bill of Rights in the Constitution, but also freedom from want and fear. And although he had in mind something not quite on the scale of what he would eventually articulate as an economic Bill of Rights, Americans heard the promise that he laid out in the very terms that he would come to speak of in January 44. Now, in 1943, FDR was determined to find out what Americans wanted after the war. And polls were conducted across the country on a fairly vast scale. And Americans were asked, what is it you want to see after the war? And as one of the pollsters said in a book he later wrote, they wanted everything, okay? He found out that Americans wanted guarantees, and they felt they had worked to secure this possibility in the New Deal. They wanted guarantees of healthcare, employment, housing, and education. And FDR went before the nation, January 6, 1941. He called for an economic Bill of Rights for all Americans. Now, I don't know if any of you have picked up Bernie's new book, but I can tell you Bernie makes a mistake in that new book of his, a very bad historical mistake. He says, he acknowledges this call for an economic Bill of Rights, but he says it was generally ignored because of the war. It was not ignored, not at all. American progressive organizations, American labor unions, both the American Federation of Labor and the Congress of Industrial Organizations, and civil rights groups campaigned, not feverishly perhaps, but ardently during that year to get FDR reelected. And they made it very clear that they saw that election as the basis upon which they would go on to create an economic Bill of Rights. I didn't create slides, but I can tell you, here's a volume, the first round, the story of the CIO Political Action Committee. It's a hefty book. This is the set of pamphlets and if you like, missives sent out by the CIO alone to secure an economic Bill of Rights after the war. But FDR warned in that speech, he warned that there would be rightist reaction. And what he meant by that, he was very clear, was the corporate bosses and the right wing of whatever party would oppose the economic Bill of Rights. And he was right. The GI Bill of Rights would pass. And ironically, the GI Bill of Rights would pass because the otherwise very conservative American Legion rallied to make sure that Southern white supremacists in Congress and conservative Republicans around the country would not stand in the way. But they could not secure that more universal economic Bill of Rights that FDR had proposed. Now, the idea didn't die. It came through in one sense. There was an effort to create a guarantee of employment after the war, which wasn't quite what FDR envisioned. He envisioned a right to full employment. It turned into a commitment to full employment. But it is the case that both Harry Truman and Henry Wallace, respectively, sought to sustain the vision of the Economic Bill of Rights. Now, what most people don't realize, I'm sure 99% of the delegates to any Democratic convention don't realize, is that in 1960, the Democratic Party platform was written by Chester Bowles, who had been the head of the Office of Price Administration during the war. And he specifically wrote it to project that original call for an economic Bill of Rights. And I can tell you, if you go look at the 60 platform, you will be amazed at how it is really a call for that economic Bill of Rights to be secured. They were afraid at the time that Kennedy would reject the platform because he was not progressive enough. But knowing that he didn't want to piss off Eleanor Roosevelt, he probably said, okay, I'll live with it. In 1966, labor and civil rights leader A. Philip Randolph proposed a freedom budget, which today would be a cheap budget, by the way. It called for $10 billion over in every one of the 10 ensuing years to fight poverty and erase poverty from America. It was inspired, very clearly laid out in terms of FDR's 4 freedoms and economic Bill of Rights. And I just want to say that it garnered the endorsements of 150 labor and civil rights leaders, foundation heads, and prominent progressive intellectuals. This was the original pamphlet, a freedom budget for all Americans, budgeting our resources 1966 to 1975 to achieve freedom from want. In 1968, not long before his assassination and death, that is his assassination, Martin Luther King issued a call for an economic Bill of Rights when he was pursuing the Poor People's Movement. And of course, Senator Bernie Sanders spoke of it in 2015 and later harnessed it to his campaign in 2020, though I don't think he harnessed it firmly enough between us. It's also the case that there have been intellectuals and academics. Mark Paul, William Darity, and Derek Hamilton proposed in the American Prospect a few years ago an American economic Bill of Rights, which we've been in conversation with them. More recently, my own state representative, Christina Shelton, Assemblywoman, and Francesca Hong, Assemblywoman of Madison, Wisconsin, proposed for the Democratic Party to embrace an economic justice Bill of Rights. And there is a lot of enthusiasm in the ranks of the Democrats in the state legislature, but they have so little power, they can't even get it on the docket, as they say. However, this spring, they're going to renew that effort in a major event in Madison, Wisconsin. The Massachusetts Democratic Party embraced the economic Bill of Rights we proposed in convention this past summer. And I can tell you, we have had serious queries both from New Hampshire and from the progressive movement inside of the Democratic Party in West Virginia, which I believe is on the verge of taking complete command of that party, much to Manchin's delight, I'm sure. Anyhow, let me make this clear. This economic Bill of Rights, it has a narrative because it's rooted in the American story. This has been, if we think back to 1932, we're talking 90 years of serious desire for an economic Bill of Rights. So I'm going to hand it over to Alan right now, because he'll take up the question of policies and programs and politics. And at the end, I'll come back for any questions you have.
Harvey, JK, thank you so much. I do have a slight housekeeping thing to say. Occasionally, my call drops. If it does, I will come back as fast as possible. Oftentimes, I use my phone as the backup, but I won't be doing that now. So if I do lose you, I'll be back within 2 or 3 minutes, and I apologize for that. I'm at the mercy of one of our tech monopolies here in my household with my internet connection. So thank you, Harvey, again, for that incredible review of the past 75 years of American history in relationship to a 21st century, where an economic Bill of Rights moving into now the proposal for a 21st century economic Bill of Rights. I'm the executive director of Progressive Democrats of America, and I can take no credit for what undoubtedly was the most influential act that PDA ever took in its history, which is that we were the sole national organization to draft Bernie Sanders to run for president. And I think that's an important point to make at the beginning, because what that sparked was the arrival on the national stage, the re-arrival of progressive politics. And I think we actually live at a moment when we have, I think, three political tendencies, very broad stroke understood, vying for political power in the United States. And they are the Trumpian Republicans on the right, the neoliberal moderates, quote unquote, moderates in the middle, which run from the Romney wing of the party through the Clinton wing of the Democratic Party. And then we have the progressives. And I think what's important about the way Harvey left off and where I will pick up is my strong sense that the only of the three political tendencies, only one of them really represents an effort to create a renewed sense of societal renewal. And you can look at it, if you like, as even patriotic renewal. In other words, faith in the American project is well nigh shattered. If you look at polling, and I want to start with polling, contemporary polling, it's very odd that you have a moneyed political establishment that before the arrival of Bernie didn't notice the overwhelming tendency for the American public to poll with a sense of dissatisfaction about the direction of the country. Secondly, since Ronald Reagan was president, in polling, the top polling concern for the voting public, lapping everything else across the 45 years almost since Reagan, has been the economy. Okay, and now we arrive at the progressive movement that is reborn with the Bernie Sanders presidential run of 2016, strengthened further by the performance of the squad in 2018, and then strengthened further, on the one hand, by the debates early on in the Democratic presidential cycle, where there was pretty much unanimity that Sanders had shifted the Overton window in where the debate was, especially on economic and domestic issues. And then Sanders actually came closer in 2020 to winning the nomination, I believe, if you look at it and analyze it, I think with a clear view of how the 2016 and 2020 nominating races occurred in the Democratic Party. Bernie came closer to winning in 2020 than he ever really did in 2016. He was ahead later in the game, and the way the calendar was out ahead of him, he had a clear angle to win the nomination, except for an unprecedented consolidation of support behind Joe Biden, where candidates who were doing much better than Biden dropped out and endorsed Biden, all in an effort to block Bernie Sanders. But it didn't negate the fact that the progressive view, distinct, constitutively distinct from the neoliberal moderates, and of course the Trumpian reactionaries, had established itself on the national political stage. Heading into the 2022 cycle, Harvey and I wrote 3 articles that I added into the chat earlier, though I know some people have joined since I added them, so I'll try to do that even as I speak right now. Now I'm going to put them in reverse order of how we publish them, and I'll be referring to them momentarily. I just posted the most recently posted article, and I'll do the second one and then the first one. We wrote these articles because we were very cognizant that even the progressives running for office were failing to highlight economics as their strong suit as candidates. It was very frustrating to look out upon. And they were playing into the hands of a basically set of right-wing media memes that progressives were all about cancel culture, and this continues to this day. In fact, Bernie Sanders, I know, will be on Bill Maher's show on Friday. Maher is as guilty as anybody, as somebody who once supported Sanders, but now basically defines the progressive movement entirely as if we are a group of, hardcore Stalinists who police everybody's language. Whereas what we in fact focus on, and in the second of these articles, and I'll get to this in a little while, clearly in the 117th Congress, when Build Back Better was being presented, the progressives in Congress, and Sanders, of course, as well, and Warren in the Senate too, honed in entirely on economic measures. And yet somehow to the general public, the idea that the progressive movement singularly represented a different economic deal for the American public than the continuity of 45 years of neoliberalism, which had basically failed the American public, producing mass dissatisfaction, not only in polling with the state of the economy. And yes, when you see economics ranking as the top concern among voters year in, year out, That's not because they're satisfied with the economy. That's because they're dissatisfied with the economy. And then, of course, the direction of the country question has been going down. So we wrote these articles in part motivated by the need to get across to progressives that their strong suit was what they were practicing in Congress. And they needed, as Harvey said, a narrative, a clear narrative that connected to American history. And, you know, it's one thing to say we're dissatisfied with the direction of the country. It doesn't mean people are giving up on the promise of American society, which I do believe, though this is a much less, I can't point to specific polls, but the idea of promise inside American economy, American society, of course, among other things, is made clear by the fact that people still try in droves to immigrate to the United States of America. So what is a framing that can be provided that in a very concrete and clear form can convey the different deal of an America which is fair economically, that will lift up and provide opportunities, real opportunities for social mobility for people who are poor and working class, security for the middle class, and yes, even a vision of a society that is cohesive and promising and moving forward that should appeal to everyone except the very, very top most wealthy people in the United States, borrowing from Occupy, the whole idea of the 99%. And so we feel that the Economic Bill of Rights does this, okay? And it is, of course, more of a idea of presenting a vision of a society in which these things are achieved, an America in which these things are achieved, okay? And as such, we truly believe that this is something that connects to a deep reservoir of sentiment among the American public, that the promise of American society, as outlined in even the founding documents that Harvey cited of the country, is profound, that there's incredible dismay, that this sense of direction has been lost. And at the core of people's dismay and sense of alienation from the political system is the domination of our economic system by elites who garner all the wealth for themselves and not for the average person. And so we wrote this with a mind, not only because point by point in the Economic Bill of Rights, these are strong, sound ideas, and they're non-utopian. We're talking to Democrats abroad across today, and as you know, even as neoliberalism chips away in Western Europe and other parts of the world, a very core set of social policies are essentially third rails in Western Europe, and for that matter, in all of the other most prosperous, and you know, whatever one makes of the Cold War and the lines of contestation of the Cold War, we know what the other richest countries in the world are. They were our allies. I mean, if you look at it in terms of equitable wealth distribution plus aggregate wealth, they are our allies from the Cold War, right? Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Western Europe. And all of those countries that I name checked basically have a much more generous and complete social, publicly funded benefits system for the population. Sometimes, very, very much so. We point to countries like in Scandinavia, sometimes slightly less so, but at a very fundamental level, providing the core components of the 21st century Economic Bill of Rights. And to get this in to the circulation of American political discourse, we feel will absolutely resonate with the American people and raise the question, why do they get this and we don't? And we must have them demand it. And by the way, for what it's worth, I think the United States does have more material assets still than any other country in the world, some of which are not generally considered within the national political discourse. For instance, the balance of academic and university research, intellectual capital, and physical infrastructural capital is in the United States of America. Obviously, the agriculture is very strong. Their agricultural self-sufficiency, we all know about that. But again, the United States should be and should have distributed greater aggregate wealth shared by a broad middle class than we have. And this is a template to achieve it. And that template, we believe, is a very, very powerful winning economic message for the American people. So I did want to just quickly point out the second of the three articles. And Harvey read the list of the Economic Bill of Rights. And in the second of these articles, so the one in the middle of the three that I just posted in the chat, that is from April 6th of 2022. We literally go through the Bill of Rights as they were listed at that time. We actually changed the list of them in the next article to expand them slightly. But we point out all of the really existing legislation that was introduced in the 116th Congress and 117th Congress. The current Congress is the 118th. And show that not only is the Economic Bill of Rights a messaging framework or an aspirational framework, but in fact, the actually existing progressive wing of the Democratic Party at the federal level is introducing point by point legislation that matches up with every 10 of these. Some of them with multiple pieces of legislation, some of them not introduced by members of the Progressive Caucus even. And that's, of course, a longer debate about, do we need to have a complete turnover and, sort of a progressive sweep of the moderate members of Congress, or as we saw a glimmer of promise in the last Congress, many of them can be won over to our side. And by the way, I was in an interview recently, and I cited the British documentarian Adam Curtis, who maybe some of you are familiar with. And as sort of litany in Curtis's films he focuses, it very much concentrates on the neoliberal domination of Western politics. And he says, with the neoliberal turn, politicians realized they no longer had a vision to mobilize people, and they ceded power to the banks. That's specifically Curtis's litany, and it's exceptional and controversial series of documentaries he's made for the BBC. If people are unfamiliar with them, they're quite exceptional. One of the higher profile ones in this string of films about the rise of neoliberalism was called Hypernormalization. He's produced a couple since that are, again, equally address the subject matter. And I think with the pandemic, we actually did see even some of the moderate neoliberal Democrats see in the Sanders program, as it became more influential within the party, a glimmer that maybe they themselves, as historical actors, could actually create a set of economic programs, redistributive economic programs, that would address the deep, deep, deep sense of dismay the American public feels. Now, look, I want to sort of end with this because the progressive movement is strong in the United States, much stronger than it ever was before the arrival of Sanders. There's no doubt that history is a huge contributor to that. And COVID has added to that. But then, we're in a quirky situation in the United States of America in that Barack Obama was elected at the very moment that the 07-08 market collapse happened. And that's why I think the 2016 election, much like the 1980 election, and hopefully this will prove out over history, was a transformative election in American history, where the break with neoliberalism was finally appearing on the national political stage. There was basically like a 7-year delay because of the singularity of Barack Obama as a personal political figure and his importance historically in American history, that there wasn't a challenge to him, of course, within the party, even when he brings up Rubens and Summers to run his economics team. And to prioritize the health of the banks over the health of homeowners, which again was their turn, and to defend Barack Obama a little bit. I don't think when he was running for president, he expected the global economy to collapse on his head the moment he arrived in office. But so Sanders appears in 2016, but we are at a bit of a moment of crisis around the fact that the presidential race has been so huge in terms of, and Bernie's success, aided in a peculiarly by Elizabeth Warren, because of course she ended up not really helping Sanders out much during the 2020 race at all. But her policies also pretty much reflected the 2016 Bernie Sanders platform. But in the absence of a progressive presidential candidate, this heightens the need for the kind of clarity of framing around economic issues that progressives have to place a stake in the ground. And obviously, Harvey and I, you should take our words on this with a grain of salt, since we're the authors of these articles, that we firmly believe that we have come up with, along with our partners that Harvey mentioned, an incredible group of people of it. Economist William Darity, Derek Hamilton, Mark Paul, these are exceptional people. The particular state legislatures around the country, that have also advocated for this, and of course the people back historically who advocated for a Bill of Rights. I know of no other framing that makes clear at the core top polling issue for the American people, and that addresses the sense of dismay and decline in American society, than the clarity that Franklin Roosevelt introduced in 1944 in the State of the Union, an economic Bill of Rights. And in the 21st century, where we have unprecedented wealth inequality and a deep, deep sense among the majority of the population that the American economy represents a dead end for them, that a 21st century economic Bill of Rights progressives need to claim as their mantle. We're not going to have Bernie out there, leading a presidential run again, in almost all likelihood. It's possible still, but a number of things would have to happen specifically for him to be the person to do it. And so, this is how, but progressives cannot fade back and no longer be that third force and have it. And look, let's also, Bernie got criticism on some fronts for not emphasizing foreign policy, other elements of clearly endemic problems in American society. He honed in on 2016 on economics in his new book. He hones on in it again. And I think he does understand in his bond with the American polity, his deep, deep popularity among broad sweeps of the American public is because he speaks specifically to their sense of economic despair. And I think this is something that progressives need to claim. And I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Harvey and Alan, both for really putting into a historical and policy context the economic Bill of Rights, and also helping us to see how we need to change the narrative of America into a more progressive narrative, which actually includes all Americans. The first questions we have will be taken from our caucuses, and Sue, I believe you have a question from the Progressive Caucus.
Yeah, thank you very much. I was really struck by the history. It was really helpful to have that framing because the polling of people, back at that time about what they wanted to see after the war, clearly showed, this interest in the various economic rights that, that became the focus at that time. And we have very similar polling results now, right? We're seeing that, and yet it's not happening. It's not happening at all, to the extent that we need it to. And I guess, yes, we can all continue to, work hard to get progressive candidates elected, but is there a strategy around how we break this this current system where no matter what people want, they will call it the establishment, moneyed interests, whatever, sort of maintain the, power and the economic system the way it is. So is there like a strategy for how we break this apart? Like, for instance, some might argue that getting big money out of politics is kind of like a first job, if we can do that, or reducing the military budget. I know there's forces stopping either of those from happening. So I don't know, like strategically, I guess it's a two-part question, kind of like strategically, like how do we get there? And then also for us more in the grassroots, kind of like what's our role in helping?
Alan, I'm sure you have more to say on this perhaps than I do, but I want to start off by saying that I don't think we should choose the one lever. I think the first thing is that by way of the state parties, we have to get state parties on board that an economic Bill of Rights is the vision, and the narrative that accompanies it is the story that we want out there. And so if it's a matter of trying to take money out of politics, it's too narrow. If it's a matter of going after the defense budget, it's too narrow. There has to be a vision that will guide all of those endeavors. So I've been working for years, and maybe I'm a chauvinist about this particular question, but Americans don't have a great public memory, but they do have a deeper kind of memory. They know what the Declaration is referred to. They know what it means, and they know life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The problem is that Republicans for at least 50 years have done a damn good job of hijacking that story. And the progressives have offered no fight to that story. They fight on an agenda. They fight in terms of particular interests, whether they're social or economic. The trick is to fight this as an economic question with a story deeply rooted in American aspirations. I just want to emphasize that. And I know that Democrats abroad, because you guys told me this a year or two ago, is a state party. And I think it's imperative for state parties to pick this up. Look, right now, the Republicans are not advancing any legislation in Congress because they don't have to. They're going state by state and turning those states into authoritarian strongholds. It's time for us to turn every one of our state parties into democratic, small d and capital D, strongholds.
Okay. I agree with everything Harvey said. Maybe we should just hang on that positive point for a while. Because, yes, it's important for us to consider how we achieve these goals. What Harvey and I have produced is, something that almost parallels, right, not surprisingly, like Eleanor Roosevelt's hand in drafting, what was it, the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Right? There's a lot here that reflects that. So, but this is now the domestic United States of America, and we are talking concrete programs. The fact that people work, overwork, they don't work and make a living wage at putting in 40 hours a week. And by the way, the top point here is about that. Who is going to be asked in a poll? In an adult works 35 or 40 hours a week, right? Should they be able to live comfortably on the wage that is provided for them? Almost nobody will say no. If they work that, if the private market or the public sector through legal processes has determined that that job exists in our society, you work 35 or 40 hours a week, you should get a living wage. And that's at the top of it, because that is not true in America right now. Okay. So, and then if the private sector is not going to provide it, the public sector should. And whether it's shovel-ready jobs or whatever, as you see, the unemployment rate is very low. And right now, actually, it's a crazy circumstance we're in right now. It really is low. There really are more job postings available than there are the people listed. Now there's a skill gap there with the people who are registering as unemployed. And of course, we do know there are many people not captured as listed as officially unemployed because they've just dropped out of the market for the labor market as defined by the government currently. And we all remember Reagan changed the terms of how that was defined. But it's a big issue of how we get there. And you go right to this moment in 1992, I always do, where Bill Clinton had an economic retreat after winning the presidency. And legendarily, I think this is in Bob Woodward's book about that retreat, Robert Rubin literally pulls Clinton aside and says, Bill, hey, Bill, we've been working with you for years on this with the DLC. You seem to be believing the rhetoric you ran in your campaign. You can't do that. We have to be responsive to the bond markets. Okay. So look, that is down the road that we'll have to contend with that. How we keep the economy balanced and moving forward, how we don't have a capital strike or a collapse of bond markets when things just become too progressive because the financial markets and the logic of neoliberalism is such that it cannot digest what we're proposing at the country that is the most neoliberalized of all the major economies in the world. And of course, it is the largest economy in the world. So that's a real concern. And I personally think more domestic productivity on the level of manufacturing is probably central to balancing that out so that we can have real investment and real operations so we don't have a fall off if the enemies of our project try to suffocate it. But that's down the road. Right now, we have to build a whirlwind of support for a basic template of what it means that Americans deserve when, again, they simply are operating as good faith players in our economy. Because right now, that is not the case. I mean, the ongoing privatization of Medicare right now, it's savage. It's savage, and people do not understand it. My own family, my mom came very close to running out of the 100 days of long-term care that she was covered for. The cost of the next year of long-term care if she needed it, and by the way, these institutions are structured to keep people there, the doctors say they can't be released, was about $220,000 a year to keep her in long-term care. And that's what Medicare. And so one of the problems we have too, when we say Medicare for all, we have to worry that people are getting so dissatisfied with Medicare because it's becoming privatized. And maybe we need a better slogan for that going forward. So single universal payer, and a big fight right now is reaffirming that Medicare can't be privatized to this degree. But right now, the Biden administration plus the majority of Democrats in Congress are not fighting against the ongoing privatization of Medicare. They're accepting it. So we have a lot of fights there. But again, what we're producing is a template, and this template will be a winning template for progressives as we proceed. And if we do proceed and we get closer to its implementation on theoretically the entire package at once of the 21st Century Economic Bill of Rights, or just one or two of the programs at once, we have to be aware of how capital is going to try to sabotage those things and work with economists to understand how we navigate those waters. But we have to be conscious of that, and I think we can navigate them because, again, this is not a utopian scheme. West Germany, I said West Germany. Germany is real, right? Look, Scandinavia, France, Netherlands, Belgium, you add up those countries, and that's about 160 million people, 180 million people. That's half the size of the United States. You can have a big, massive economy achieving all of these things and have a very smooth and better operating economy for the public than we have in the United States. We have to navigate those waters and get there without having, the forces of finance, capital, and so on, drop the anvil on our head as we proceed. So it's a real question, but I think the first step is getting this vision accepted on the popular political front.
Thank you for those robust answers. I really appreciate it. I think we have a couple of folks in the queue now, Betsy, with some more questions, right?
Yes, we do. Right. Okay, we have Bruce. You're up now, Bruce.
Before I ask, I think Naomi Ages from the Global Women's Caucus has a question.
Well, she just texted me and said that, in fact, her question had been answered. So we don't need to ask her question. She feels her question had been answered.
In the interest of absolutely being fair, I want to ask also, does the Reparations Task Force representative have a question?
Yes, I do.
Great. Go ahead, Antar.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for having this amazing event. And thank you, Alan and Harvey, for sharing such insights with us. It's interesting that you have had contact with Dr. William Darity and Miss Nina Turner, because our Reparations Task Force recently spoke with both of them last month about an element of American economic justice that is surging in the nation right now, and that is reparations or reparative justice. It's interesting how activists and political economists alike often, such as in the past MLK and today Dr. Darity and Nina Turner, are cited as experts on progressive economic support, while their messaging perhaps on reparative justice, with the exception of Dr. Darity, often is peripheral to that paradigm. If reparative justice represents an effort to right the impoverishing and otherwise oppressive wrongs of the past towards African Americans, does the 21st Century Economic Bill of Rights provide sufficient and/or insufficient justice for African Americans? And I mentioned this question, especially in regards with Bernie Sanders's 2016 reluctance to declare that there is a unique damage done to Black Americans. He signed S40, the Senate reparations study bill, but he's failed to make any bold declaration that challenges the oftentimes wrote saying, one tide must lift all boats. In your opinion, what more would be necessary for reparative justice when we prefigure a 21st century economic Bill of Rights?
You want to go first, Harvey?
Well, I'll just say that the Economic Bill of Rights we have proposed is indeed a universal. Okay, we do not include reparative justice specifically, though I do believe that if you look at number 7, a meaningful endowment of resources at birth and a secure retirement, that this is perhaps, it's an echo of two things. It's an echo, first of all, of Thomas Paine's call for all young people to receive a grant of money at the very outset of their maturity in order to avoid poverty. That's for a start. But more recently, obviously, it is an echo of the idea of baby bonds. So yes, this is a universal call, a call for a universal economic Bill of Rights for all Americans. It does not address questions of reparative justice. That's just, yeah.
Yeah, and I would just say too that in this it echoes the Economic Bill of Rights that was authored by Professor Darity, Derek Hamilton, and Mark Paul in the American Prospect. So that even Darity, for people who don't know, is he's written a book, one of the leading advocates in the country, and in fact, a very robust reparations proposal. And I agree with, well, first of all, PDA does have a formal policy of supporting reparations. In this, we differ with Bernie Sanders, and we differed with him in 2016. And we've had Professor Darity on a number of calls, and his partner co-authored his book with. But above and beyond that, again, in the version that they authored, it was a universal call. And Professor Darity, and this goes towards my own thinking about reparations, is that the racial wealth gap, as it is defined in the United States, is just, unbelievably outrageous, needs to be addressed, and needs to be balanced. And it's like it's 10 to 1. I personally don't see how that can happen. I think that has to be a goal. I think it's a signifier of extreme human rights abuses across American history that continue to this day, as exemplified by the ongoing racial wealth gap. And Darity focuses on that. I believe I'm correct in saying this for Darity's work, to bring that into balance. And so his very high-end cost that he puts is what it would do. What I do think, let's just say in the hypothetical, again, big hypothetical, that the 21st Century Economic Bill of Rights, or especially the measure that Harvey cited, which is drawn directly from Darity and the American Prospect article, would probably start to lessen that. I mean, by the way, folks, a 10 to 1 economic wealth gap is astonishing. My feeling is anything for, especially ancient communities like white America and Black America, to be anything more than like 1 to 1.25 is a signifier of something that's extremely out of whack. And it's 10 to 1 in the United States. So yeah, we support, I don't see how this could pull us any closer to, having that distance, but then all the extra work, in my personal opinion, would have to come through direct reparations, and I would support that. Now, how they would be organized, that's a big, big intellectual question, as you know, and a topic for another forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We do have a question from our chair of the Global Black Caucus, Jazz. Oh, I see that his question, he says, has been answered.
Yes,
okay.
My question has just been answered. But in this second, thank you both very, very much for this very informative and insightful conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Jazz. Okay, Bruce, you had a question.
I do, and I'm also keeping an eye on the clock, and I want to keep this short, and if you wish, consider it kind of a question comment. I'm also kind of obsessed by how we move down the road progressively with this narrative changing. And it seems to me that the progressive organizations in the United States are playing a big role, and that we have to continue doing that. We have to grow the Congressional Progressive Caucus in between the lines there is. How do we do this most effectively? And the thing that is on my mind right now has to do with Nina Turner being on the State of the Nation on CNN yesterday, and having the courage to say, we do need to have a serious debate about our vision as Democrats going into 2024. And we do need to have more than one candidate. And I guess if there's a question, the question would be, to what extent do you think we can get there and have other candidates, maybe Senator Turner being one of them, so that this narrative that we think is so important gets onto the national stage repeatedly? And are there other ways to keep it on the national stage without having a presidential candidate taking care of that?
There could soon be more than enough candidates entering the race, because it takes one to start. And this coming Saturday, I have little doubt that Marianne Williamson will be announcing her candidacy. And she has made it clear to us her commitment to advancing the question of the Economic Bill of Rights. And we've talked at length with Nina about this as well. I'm not privy to her thinking on entering the race or not, but I think she will be championing the Economic Bill of Rights question over the course of the next year and two. You know, Bernie says he won't run, as we all know, unless Joe Biden doesn't. And frankly, if Joe Biden doesn't run, it's hard to imagine people turning to somebody older than Joe Biden as their candidate, though he's always been my favorite. I know Ro Khanna is probably salivating, and there are probably others as well. But in any case, I don't know how to get more candidates in. I only know that one is about to enter right now.
I have a very busy schedule ahead of me, but my hand keeps almost forcing itself to take pen to paper. And I love Harvey just about as much as anybody in the world, but I disagree with him on the age thing and Bernie. He was just on MSNBC.
He's got my vote. Don't get me wrong. I'm not the one.
But I just think there's so much difference between the energy that Bernie brings and what Biden brings at the moment, which is a terrible thing to say, but we all assess people and instinctively assess people as to how they're functioning, in public spaces as we see them in our personal presence. The scenario in which Bernie gets involved would be a late announcement by Biden that he's not running. Obviously, Bernie has the advantage of being able to set up the infrastructure of a campaign much more quickly than just about anybody, because he's done it twice in a row. I do think there's sort of a singularity to Bernie still that hasn't really been achieved by any of his many surrogates across the country. Nina Turner is great, though. She's also got a sort of singular persona, can connect with a number of people. It seems that there's a lot, if Biden runs, there'll be intense pressure on any office holder who is a Democrat not to run. And I am anticipating that will prove persuasive. So then you are left with people with the profile such as Nina Turner, Marianne Williamson on the left. And then the question, I don't think it's impossible to imagine a scenario, and I know people may guffaw at this, that Marianne Williamson could be a Eugene McCarthy type character.
That's sort of what I was implying, right?
Yeah, because she is very eloquent on these issues. And I, for one, am not somebody with that kind of spiritual background or practice, but I understand it's pretty widespread among Americans. So who knows how much traction that will have. Probably everybody on this call will have as much insight on that question as I would.
Thank you very much. Next question is from Marnie. She had to leave, but she's given me a question. It's very short. How does your vision compare to the, quote, well-being economy, unquote, concept?
I plead ignorance.
I think I'm there too.
Okay.
I can speculate, but if the person can clarify, I'd love to.
Well, she's working actually on a global event that's going to be looking at this whole idea of the well-being economy, and various caucuses are going to look at it from their points of view.
What does that mean, though?
Yeah. I think I'm not sure, actually. I don't know. Maybe somebody else on the call. Sue, do you have any ideas? Or Bruce?
No, I don't know, but I'm guessing maybe it's a European initiative if our guest speakers aren't aware of it.
Okay,
Well,
right.
it sounds like, I'm guessing it sounds like the sort of like looking at the sort of 360 welfare of human beings as they live. I don't know.
I want to chime in too and suggest that if we still have people in the queue, that we ask each of them to ask their questions. And then once we've done that, move on to our co-sponsor statements.
Right. Okay, Caitlin, you're on next.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much. My question concerns the idea of coalition building. It's something, Bruce mentioned, we were just on a call right before this, and one of the topics we were discussing was coalition building around a reparations resolution that might be introduced. And, when I think about really exciting social movements happening in the US right now that speak to the needs and aspirations of so many Americans and speak to, the real moral need for change in our country. I think of, the labor movement and the reparations movement. Those are the two that really come to my mind. And it seems to me like there's so much potential and opportunity for mutual support, but I don't see so much open collaboration there. I think partly there might be this fear that, endorsing reparations might hurt the project of building up mass public support, or, there might be an idea that kind of furthering universal policies like y'all are speaking to today, and reparations measures might be mutually exclusive, but we really don't have to see things that way. So I'm wondering, from y'all's perspective, what we could possibly do to bring more groups together, more people, more organizations, and mutual to support. What can we do if we want to bring, what y'all are proposing to our reparations coalition and present this to them? What maybe, can we do when we're trying to reach out to, labor groups and other actors to try to win their support as well? So wondering if y'all have any thoughts on that.
Go ahead, Harvey.
Well, at least on the Economic Bill of Rights question, I am in regular contact with a friend who has I think, the best voice going right now in the labor movement. It's Sarah Nelson. And the problem in the labor movement is that it's called the labor movement, but it's not as singular as the name implies. And just to give you an example of what I mean, a goodly number of the labor leaders who belong on the executive board of the AFL-CIO were probably worried about the organizing at Amazon by Chris Smalls as opposed to welcoming of it, because it seemed a challenge to those of them who do not believe that the first job of a labor union is organizing. So I don't know about the coalition building beyond that. I think Alan could probably speak to that more, but my efforts, even as Alan and I pursue this, is also to look for ways into the labor movement by way of my own union, the American Federation of Teachers, by way of AFA. I do what I can to promote solidarity around organizing and strikes, and always trying to insert the question of the Economic Bill of Rights. I don't want to spend more time discussing it because it gets into sort of nitty-gritty kinds of things, but I think you've posed a really critical question.
Oh boy, yeah, no, it's a great question. I don't want to be long-winded. It sounds like you guys are pressed for time, but I'll try to be quick here. Okay, so one initiative that we're working on at PDA is for a rural New Deal. We all know that rural America is overwhelmingly represented by Republican politicians. And of course, rural America and small town America has also been suffering tremendously economically. We know the Republicans don't really have anything on offer to improve or reverse that downward trend in terms of the livelihood of rural Americans. And we also know that neoliberal Democrats don't either. So we're interested in progressive economic proposals for rural Americans. We're working with a broad coalition. Interestingly, this is even inspired partly, and I'm the person who initiated this particular effort There are other parallel efforts, but we're working with a whole number of groups. Reimagine Appalachia, the Rural Urban Bridge Initiative, but it's partly inspired by a congressional candidate in North Carolina's 1st District who lost a controversial race for the primary, Erica Smith, and the agricultural workers in her district were largely Black Americans. So that's North Carolina's 1st District, and she literally had a rural New Deal proposal as part of her campaign program. Clearly, how the Democratic Party is going to perform going forward nationally, if it's going to achieve the kind of majorities that Franklin Roosevelt had, which we'd love to re-achieve, with no Dixiecrats either, of course, we're going to have to win in rural America. And we think progressive economic proposals should have resonance there. Now, there is a lot of barriers to achieving success for the Democratic Party in rural America. We understand that. Simply putting out a national progressive economic template is not going to reverse things. And it's going to take a lot of understanding things. And things are quite localized, in particular when you're talking about rural policies, because the regions of the country are so different. But the Republicans are basically winning almost everywhere, other than districts like Erica's, which was won by her Democratic opponent. Are controlled by the Republican Party. So there's that. And as for reparations and relationships, also developing a rural New Deal, at least PDA, we're not going to back away from our position on reparations. Anybody who asks us about it, it's like, it's historical common sense, end of argument. So we will proceed that difficult path of doing what we think is ethically and also economically best for the country in our advocacy across all fronts. But certainly agricultural workers in rural America and small town America have been suffering tremendously too. The endemic social crises across, again, rural and small town America are at epidemic proportions right now. Healthcare deserts, opioid addiction, economic decline, all public spending in decline, and the private sector not making up the difference. So, again, if progressive economics cannot connect with those people, then it's the wrong progressive economics. So we certainly are trying to build a template to do that.
Thank you very much. There's one last question from Larry, who had to leave, and he's given me the question. The question is, what about trying to break the power of the duopoly and make the system more democratic, opening everything up to third parties and then working with parties like the Greens and Freedom Socialists to get some of these things done?
First of all, I'm trying to type and answer at the same time. Antar and Caitlin, yes. Thank you so much for that. And I'll put my email in the chat and my phone number. I'll take this and then hand off to Harvey. Look, third parties in America. Look, I am not gonna try to put on a political scientific hat. Everybody on the call knows as much about this as I do. For some reason in this country, in our system, it has always been a two-party system. The one time one party flipped over, whatever that was, 1830s, 1840s. Second part, the Republicans, 1850s. The Republicans just replaced them. We've always had a two-party system in the United States. Effectively, you're banging your head against the wall. So yes, of course, if somebody's going to win and they're going to be a Green, we want them to caucus with the progressive Democrats. But the efforts in those parties, I think people who are involved in those parties really have to look in the mirror and ask if whether their efforts are constructive, or please at least come in for a season or two and help us fight the fight within the Democratic Party, because we just live in this system. I am no way averse to having the social transformation take place under another title other than whatever title it is. But right now we live in a two-party system, and it's just how many Green elected officials are there across the country in races where there's a clear designation? It's close to zero. So
there's nothing I could say in addition to that, really.
Okay, thanks very much. Now we have the co-host statements at the end.
Yes, I'd like to switch the order just a little bit, because Antar has been there with a really good question, and I'd like to come back to him. But first of all, go to the Global Women's Caucus and Naomi Ages.
Thanks very much. I will stay brief because I know everybody has questions to get to. So I want to thank the Global Progressive Caucus for inviting us to co-sponsor this event. I'd like to thank the speakers for giving their time so generously and keeping us engaged in this effort. And so Bruce alluded to this at the beginning of the event, but we are closing up Black History Month and entering Women's History Month. And so many of you will probably be aware that this March, it will be 100 years since the Equal Rights Amendment was introduced. So 100 years since women have been fundamentally denied equality in the Constitution. Now, of course, the Equal Rights Amendment isn't a solution to all gender inequality, but we need affirmative measures like that and like this Bill of Rights in order to recreate systems that currently aren't working. It's systems that pay women less than men, attack trans women with violence, expect women to do the bulk of home and care work for free, and aggressively take away our rights to abortion and healthcare. So women, as we know as well as anybody, that there is no freedom without economic freedom. So we fully support the proposals that you've put forward and, eager to support the work that you're doing with progressive Democrats, but really in transforming the party to embrace these positions as mainstream and not be afraid of being or not being sidelined as only progressive positions. Finally, I just want to close by inviting Democrats Abroad members to check out the Global Women's Caucus social media pages and our social media, where we're highlighting all the events we have coming up for Women's History Month, and make you aware of our March 5th event in our Awareness to Action series, which is with the author of Every 90 Seconds, Our Common Cause, Ending Violence Against Women. As with achieving economic freedom, we need all of our allies to engage on this important issue as well. And I will drop the link to that event in the chat, as well as the Women's Caucus page, so you can follow us. Thank you again to Bruce and the Progressive Caucus, and onward.
Naomi, thank you very much. And we're going to move onward immediately, asking Jazz, the chair of the Global Black Caucus, for their comments.
Yes, there we are again. Sorry, just had something in my throat here. I just lost my script. There we go. Well, if we're looking at history right now, the largest protest movement in the history of our world was birthed on the shores of the US by our people who have declared that Black Lives Matter. Black people, particularly Black women, saving the best prospects of democracy in the last election cycle is yet another testament to the fact. 2023 Black History Month theme provided by the Global Black Caucus is Black resistance in the past, present, and future. And the topic of tonight is definitely one that has been in the past, which is in the present, and that will be a future of hopefully all of our Black folks receiving equality on all measures. Placing Black history in this context of past and present affirms that it does not begin with slavery. This point of departure is also a reminder that history should not be merely regulated to the past, but that in this moment, in this very moment, we're making history in a way that will impact the kind of future we will have together. And on this note, I would also like to say thank you very much for everyone who has shared posts, information, knowledge widely during Black History Month. But please not forget, Black History Month is not just in February, it is every single day. Black history is women's rights. Black history is economic freedom. Black history is every single day. Thank you.
Jazz, thank you very much. And we agree. And we want to continue moving onward. Antar Keith, chair of the Reparations Task Force, take it away.
Yes, will do. Alrighty, so what I'm going to put in the chat box now is the next Reparations Task Force organizing meeting. So in our task force, we work with a coalition of over 350 different US-based political organizing committees, synagogues, churches, civil rights societies. And we are really working towards closing a chapter in American history, a chapter that continually cracks open the door of a pernicious past, oftentimes these days with unarmed police shootings and, basically inhumanities and deprivations inflicted upon Black Americans, be it in Buffalo, New York, with a madman killing Black people, or Flint, Michigan, with poisoned water, or this Dillhole, whatever the fuck his name is. Anyways, we work to eliminate the disparities brought on by the legacy of slavery, federal policy in the form of Jim Crow, and present-day disparities by normalizing, mainstreaming, and really championing the federal House Reparations Bill, H.R. 40, as well as all state and local and municipal reparation legislation, and supporting different commissions and task forces that can arise and do arise once these pieces of legislation are acted upon. So we're going to be meeting tomorrow at, I believe, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. If you have interest, please join us. There is room in this movement for everybody. And let me repeat that again. There is room in this movement for everybody. Some of our most staunchest allies and supporters have come directly from the progressive movement, So even if you are not Black, join us. We need your help, and we'll be meeting tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Antar, and I'll be there, and looking forward to it. Now I'd like to turn it over to our Vice Chair of the Progressive Caucus, Sue Auxness, to take us out.
Quickly ask our guest speakers if they have any closing remarks, just like a minute each. Anything you want to share with us? We're feeling so inspired.
I'll just say, go ahead, Alan. I was just going to say thank you for a start. Okay, and this is the second time I've spoken to your caucus, and it's a pleasure. And again, I want to urge you to act as you told me you could, as literally the progressive activists inside Democrats Abroad. I was blown away when I heard that. I didn't realize Democrats Abroad was a state party. And seriously speaking, I cannot push it strongly enough that state parties have got to take on this job, because I don't think the higher reaches of the Democratic Party will face up to it in any other way. That's about it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Antar, can you send me that invitation for tomorrow's meeting if it's appropriate that someone from PDA attend? Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, it might be a little short notice for the person who does coordinate that effort on our behalf. They have a day job, so I might be there myself. Okay. Final thoughts. Thank you. Final thoughts. Yeah, just look, I think this is a very powerful framing, and it's very exciting to know that I saw that in June, there might be an opportunity to have the whole group of Democrats abroad support this. Right now, we have one state party. We've only tried one state party. We're 1 for 1. Looks like we'll be 2 for 2 for West Virginia. And we could be 3 for 3 with Democrats abroad adopting. Yes, we shall do that. And maybe what we'll do is ask the folks from, actually, it's funny, in Massachusetts, what they changed it a little bit, right? They adopted a 21st Century Economic Bill of Rights. And by the way, we are ecumenical in that we respect the template produced by the 3 economists over at American Prospect. And we respect the template that was produced by the Wisconsin State Assembly people. So we were thrilled that they did alter the 10 points in Massachusetts, so they adopted it. But of course, we'd love it if you would just simply adopt the 10 that we've proposed. But feel free to, as you present it, maybe make adjustments. And actually, I think the people who presented it in Massachusetts did not themselves make any adjustments, but somehow the party hierarchy shifted one thing this way, one thing that way. And then it got approved at 96% of the vote by the Massachusetts Democratic State Party. So that would be brilliant and a great way to follow up. And I look forward to staying in touch with all of you.
Thank you very much. I'm just trying to remove spotlights and put on spotlights while I'm talking. So I'll just some quick announcements with gratitude to our guest speakers and everybody who helped with this event today. So the Progressive Caucus has our monthly Mondays sessions, the last Monday of every month. And we're focusing on reducing the power of wealth in US politics and employing the benefits to make the Economic Bill of Rights a reality from childhood to senior citizenship. So look for more details in our March email to ProDA members. And if you're not a member, you can join at the link that's going to be in the chat box. You'll need to log in or become a member of Democrats Abroad before you can join our caucus using that link. And we also have our monthly members meeting the first Saturday of each month. And our next one is coming up very soon on March 4th. And we're going to be discussing our progressive spring agenda. So we surveyed our members. We got some great responses, and some of the priorities that folks want us to focus on are reducing the power of wealth in US politics, combating climate change, and doing work within DA for helping folks get elected and participating in annual general meetings. And we'd love you to learn about leadership roles across Democrats Abroad chapters. Oh, sorry, made a mistake on my computer. Lost my notes. Okay. Yeah, we'd love you to get informed about leadership across Dems Abroad chapters and country committees and regionally and globally. And so there are elections happening now. So if you're interested in more, you can email us at proda@democratsabroad.org. And also, if you join our meeting on March 4th, in the after the session, we'll have some information and discussion for those who want to run for election somewhere within DA, the state party for Democrats living outside the U.S. states and territories. We're sometimes called the 57th state party. Also, Democrats Abroad is working on its delegate selection plan, and there's a role for everyone in DA to participate in the public comments period. So the delegate selection plan determines how DA conducts its global presidential primary and selects its delegates to the national convention to nominate the Democratic nominee for president. We talked about this today, whether it's already decided who's going to be our nominee, or is there potentially going to be some challengers. And the draft delegate selection plan will be shared on March 6th, and there'll be a period to comment on that until April 4th. And folks who have been elected as Democratic Party Committee Abroad, that's Democrats Abroad, voting members will vote on that delegate selection plan on April 22nd. So that's coming up. June 9th to 11th is the annual general meeting for DA in Washington, DC. So we'd love to see folks there, and you can also attend that online. DA's been way ahead on holding hybrid meetings way before COVID. We know how to do it. And if you're interested in being one of our issue advocates online, we have folks commenting on voting rights, reparative justice, campaign finance reforms, fighting climate change, strong labor organization, and we're looking for folks to help us cover things like Medicare for all, student loan justice, wealth tax, bloated military spending, whatever floats your boat. We would love to hear from you and have regular weekly updates for our followers on Facebook and Twitter. We'll drop those links in the chat. And Bruce, anything else?
You betcha. Thanks, Sue. I want to mention that we have a Wisconsin warrior with us in China, where it's the middle of the night, who has stayed on to tell us there's something going on in Wisconsin, and it's time for us to get the job done. Liz, do you have a minute to tell us what's going on?
I do. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and soon good night, everyone. Wisconsin has a general election on April 4th, and it's time to get Wisconsin moving in the direction it was always meant to go, which is forward. Janet Protasewicz is our progressive nominee for state Supreme Court, and she tallied more votes in our Tuesday primary than two MAGA extremists on the ballot combined. Nearly 1 million Scanies turned out to this primary, which is a record. So momentum is on our side, but we can't get overconfident because in 2019, the Supreme Court election was lost by under 6,000 votes after a flood of GOP dark money hit Wisconsin. And that's what we're seeing now. More dark money than ever is pouring into our state. So this mega-backed opponent of ours, Dan Kelly's already said he's expecting billionaires like the Uline family to shell out millions more to boost his campaign. So we've got what you know, anti-abortion laws, gerrymandered maps, GOP attacks on working families. All of these issues are on the line with our upcoming election. Even the election results of 2024 will be affected by this Wisconsin Supreme Court election. The other thing on our radar, District 8 has a special legislative election. Please inform your voters, from Door County to Appleton, including Green Bay, to vote for Jody Habish Sinkin. Her opponent is also named Dan, and he's going to be a fierce competitor. So we're not going to let Wisconsin get double damned. Here's what you can do to help. Spread the word that all voters must request their ballots now using votefromabroad.org. Then tell them they must complete and submit the FWAB backup write-in ballot. They can visit our homepage in the chat box to find everything they need for 2023, including a voter guide, an FWAB guide, and elections in published shortly. For those who may remember, she's the former state treasurer of Wisconsin, spoke to us last year in her campaign against Ron Johnson. And that'll be on YouTube shortly. Then join us for our upcoming mid-month call, which Pro-DA and I hope the Women's Caucus, I believe the Women's Caucus will be help hosting. That'll be by a former professor of mine, Howard Schwaber, and he'll be speaking on the Roberts Court, specifically the Dobbs decision on abortion and the Bruin decision on the Second Amendment. At the end of the month, Democrats Abroad Chair Candace Karistan and WisDems Chair Ben Wickler will join Wisconsinites Abroad and all of our members across the globe to rally and ensure voter turnout happens at home and abroad. So again, all of the links are in the chat box. Vote from abroad to request that ballot. FWAB next. We're here, we're ready to help, and we could use your help sharing. Thanks very much.
Wow, I'm psyched. That is, I think, a good note. We have this short-term project. We're going to get it done in Wisconsin and then use it as a springboard for a lot of the other things we're working on 2023 and beyond. I want to thank our guests again for being with us to help us learn more and to inspire us with their action in Wisconsin, California, and all around the United States. And let's move forward together, everybody. Thank you and have a good night, good evening, good afternoon.